When you write or edit VBA code in Excel, you'll do so using the Visual Basic Editor. The editor gives you all the tools you need to manage your code effectively. There are two ways to open the Visual Basic Editor in Excel. If you've already recorded or written a macro, you can display the macro dialog box. In the macro dialog box, you just click the macro you want to examine, click Edit, and the Visual Basic Editor appears. Now I'll close the editor. I did that using a keystroke, and now I'll tell you how I did that. To display the Visual Basic Editor, in the same configuration that you left it, press Alt F11. If you're in a workbook that contains no macro code, the Visual Basic Editor will open, but there will be no window. The Visual Basic Editor displays the Project Explorer panel on the left, here, with references for every worksheet and the workbook itself. If you don't see the Project Explorer panel, you can display it by clicking the Project Explorer button on the standard toolbar, which is here, or by pressing Ctrl-R. When you double-click one of these references, such as this workbook, Excel opens another code window with all the code that corresponds to the This Workbook object within the workbook. The most common code you put in the This Workbook code module is what's called an event handler. For example, if you wanted Excel to save a workbook every time a user tried to close it, you could create a routine such as this. Private sub workbook before close. And I know this will look a little confusing now, but don't worry about it. I get into detail on how all this works later in the course. So I've created my event handler, and now all I need to do is put in the code that will run whenever this event happens. And in this case, it is workbook before close. So this event code will run before a workbook is closed, but after a user has clicked the close button or done something else to try to close the workbook. So if me.saved, and all this does is have the workbook checked to see if it's been saved. If it's false, which means the workbook hasn't been saved, then save the workbook. That's how you interpret that line of code. At that point, I can either press Ctrl-S to save the workbook or click the Save button on the standard toolbar. In the Visual Basic Editor, you manage windows the same way that you manage windows or documents in Excel, Word, or any other Windows program. You have the Minimize button, where you can minimize a code window. It appears here at the bottom edge of the Visual Basic Editor. If you want to restore it, you can click the Restore button to maximize and to go back to where you were. And then, of course, if you want to close the window, you can just click the Close button. In a previous movie, I spoke about the Excel object model. If you don't have a handy reference, either in book form or online, you can check out the Excel object model using the Object Browser, which is available within the Visual Basic Editor. You can display the Object Browser by clicking the Object Browser button on the standard toolbar or by pressing F2. You can then look up any objects that you want. So for example, if I wanted to look up the workbook object, I could scroll down this list and display the workbook object. Now the Object Browser displays all of the properties, methods, and events that are contained within the workbook object. I can scroll through them, click to get more information on them, and so on. If you want to print a code module, say that I wanted to print out my code here, I could click anywhere within the code module and then either click File, Print, or press Ctrl-P. They both work. If you want to return to Excel, you can do so by either pressing Alt F11, like we did to open the Visual Basic Editor, or you can click File, Close, and Return to Excel. Now let's suppose you have 2 or more workbooks open at the same time. And for this demonstration, I'll just create a new workbook. When you do, the second workbook and its sheets appear in the Project Explorer. So I'll press Alt F11, and you see over here on the side, we have Book 2, which is the new workbook I just created, and the VB Editor workbook, which I created before. It's very easy to forget which workbook you're editing when there's more than one open, so I prefer to have one workbook open at a time. Like any editing environment, it'll take you some time to become fully comfortable using the Visual Basic Editor. Once you become familiar with its controls, though, you'll find that it's a powerful, flexible tool that helps you manage your VBA code effectively. Oh, and one more thing. Remember to save your workbook as a macro-enabled workbook. To do that, go back to the main Excel program, click the Office button. If necessary, click Save As, and then click Excel Macro-Enabled Workbook. Click Save, and there you go.